Okay, so we're looking at linear lines, which are straight lines, and you know that the patterns for linear is always this pattern, mx plus c, that's the basic equation. Anyway, it's saying to me, decide if the point -2 and 7 is on the line given the equations. So really what they're saying, what's the first coordinate they give you is x, isn't it? And the second coordinate is y. So if you want to know whether that point actually lies on that line, you sub those values in and see if that's true. So for the first one, they're telling me that y equals -3x plus 1. So when I sub in the x value, which is -2, I'm getting from up here, and plus 1, what do I get? I get -3 times -2, which is +6. A negative by a negative is a positive, plus 1. So that equals 7. So what it just told me, if x is -2, y is 7. Is that what the point says? Yeah. So that one, yes, that's true. It does lie. This point does lie on that equation, that straight line. So if we go test the other one, we've got an x and y and it equals 1. So we'll sub both the x and the y values into it. So I'll have 2 times -2, because that's what x is, and 2 times 7 equals 1. Now, if you have a look at that, that would be -4 plus 14 equals 1. So does 10 equal 1? No. So this is not on the line, because it doesn't make sense. So that was in your Chapter 1F, you had a few of those questions, so let's do it. So find the gradient and the y-intercept for these linear equations, and then they want you to sketch the graph. So obviously we know when it is in the simple form, y equals mx plus c, it's pretty easy to know that number is the gradient and the c is the y-intercept. Is that correct, boys? Yes? Good. All right, so for this one, when I'm doing A, they've asked me to find the gradient, so I'm going to say the gradient is 2, and the y-intercept for this one is -1. All right, so we need to sketch that graph. So when you're sketching a graph, you simply just have to use a ruler, so you get marks deducted in methods if you don't have used a ruler. So you've got to use your ruler, label up your axes, like so. And what you might do is you might use the y-intercept first, which is at -1. So I might go down to, I'm just going to say there's -1, and that's where I'm going to put one of my points, because that's the y-intercept, yeah? Then what I'll do is I'm going to use the gradient, and I'm going to say it's like saying 2 over 1, and then I can use rise over run method, because 2 is the same as saying 2 over 1, isn't it? Yeah? So if I write it like that, I can use the rise and run method. And what you do is you go from your -1 and you go up a rise of 2. So if I went up a rise of 2, where would I be sitting? Good, on +1. And then from there, I'm going to run over 1. So I've gone 1 over. So what would the coordinate of that point be? It would be 1 and 1. Does that make sense? And then what I do, I've got 2 points. Once I've got 2 points, line your ruler up and draw a line through it. I probably should also write the coordinates of this y-intercept. What would they be? What's the x value at the y-intercept? 0 and -1. Okay, so there's the first one done. With the second one, over here, is it in that y equals mx plus c format? No. So they want me, and I may as well put it in that format because they're asking me to tell them what the gradient is and what the y-intercept is. And it's best if I have it written like that, therefore I can just read it off. So what I'm going to do is rearrange this equation to look like this, just 1 y equals. So the first thing I'm going to move is this 2x. Now this 2x is actually plussing here. So if I move it over an equal sign, it will do the opposite. What's the opposite? Good. So at the moment, I haven't moved the 3y. I've moved the 2x. So I'm going to make it minus 2x. And I haven't moved this 3. It's still a positive 3 sitting there. Okay, now I want to move this 3 here, which is actually timesing, isn't it? So if it moves over, what's it going to do? Divide. Good. So I'll have negative 2x plus 3 divided by 3. Okay, so that can be written like that, or you could actually say it's like saying negative 2x over 3 plus 3 over 3. And what's 3 over 3? 1. So I could really write this equation out like that, yeah? So now, pretty easy to read off and tell me, what's the gradient for this graph?
2x. 2x.
What's the number in front of x? Over?
3.
So the gradient is actually that. It's the whole number. And then what's the y-intercept? Equals 1. Good. So now we've done that, we can sketch this graph the same way we did the other one. So I'm going to rule up my axes. Y, x, negative y. I'm going to go find my y-intercept, which was actually at 1. So I'll put a point there. Now, have a look. If it's a negative gradient, you can see that it is. Should it be going downhill or uphill?
Down.
So have that in your head. When you draw this line, when you're moving left to right, it should be going downwards because it's a negative gradient. Those things help you pick up whether you're doing it right, okay? So now we're going to use the rise and the run, okay? So if I have a rise of negative 2, which I have, that means you go down 2. So if I go down a rise of 2, where would I go down to? Negative 1, good. Then it says a run of 3, so I'm going to run across that way to 3. Okay, so here's my other point, which was 3, negative 1. And I'm just going to get my ruler and I'll line up my 2 points and I'll draw my straight line. Now, was it going downhill? Yes? So I think I'm pretty correct. So I know I'm going all right. I'm going to put the coordinates up here for the y-intercept. What's the x value at the y-intercept? 0, good. So make sure we're putting all the coordinates there. So I'll redo that one so you can see. And there you go. So that would be a perfect graph with full marks. Okay, finding the x and y intercepts of a linear graph. So what you've got to think of, and this is what you've got to do all the time from now on, when you hear the word x-intercept, you should hopefully automatically know this fact. What do you know about the x-intercept? Do you know that y equals? Yeah, so always think that. Every time you see that, go, that means y equals 0, because it will help you problem solve. And at the y-intercept, we know that x equals 0. So when they say sketch the following by finding the x and y intercepts, you're going to have to find them first. So for this first one, I'm going to find the x-intercept, which I said is when y equals 0. So I write out the equation, and then every time I see y, I put 0. And now I'm going to solve that equation. So at first I'm going to move this negative 8 over an equal sign. So if I move it over, it becomes a positive, the opposite. And then I've got 2x, and then I'm moving this 2, which is multiplying, over an equal sign. So it'll do the opposite, which is dividing by 2. So what's 8 divided by 2? 4. So you know that the x-intercept is 4. So you know the coordinates of the x-intercept is 4 and 0. Good. Now the next one, I'm going to do the y-intercept, which I know x equals 0. This one's often a lot easier because we can read it off, can't we? So anyway, so we know because that's the c value. So y equals negative 8. So what's the coordinate of the y-intercept? 0, -8. I'm trying to make sure you're hearing these words. You're going to get asked for that. So this is the coordinates of x-intercept. So you might get asked in that wording, so get used to it. Coordinates of y-intercept is when you give them like that, okay? Okay, so now you've got to sketch it. So we get the ruler, we draw our two lines. Sketching the x and y intercept, these ones are a lot easier. You just have to put the 2 points on the line. So label your axes, okay, and I've got 4 and -8, so I'm just going to go 4 and -8. And I get my ruler, draw a line. Was it a positive gradient looking back at your original equation? Was that, yep, the gradient was 2, yes, and it's positive. Okay, so I'm looking here when I'm talking about that gradient is 2 and it's a positive number, so it should be going uphill. So my last little thing I should put on this graph are the coordinates, so I'm going to do that, 4 and 0 and -8. And see how I didn't scale it up, did I? Like I just made sure I was in the right area of the negative numbers and the positive numbers. You don't have to like scale it up. You cover yourself by putting the coordinates and making sure your line's the right way, okay? So let's go do the next one. I might just change colours so you can see the difference. So we're just going to do x-intercept. We know is y equals 0. So if you write your equation out and then every time I see y I put 0, so I end up with -3x equals 6. That -3 is timesing, so over the other side it will divide, and x equals -2. What's the coordinates then of this x-intercept is? -2 and 0. Good, that's the coordinate. The y-intercept, I know the fact is x equals 0. I write out my equation, and then every time I see x, I've put 0. Whoops, sorry. So I get -2y equals 6. So y equals 6 divided by -2, y equals -3. So what's the coordinate of the y-intercept? 0, good, -3. I'm just going to sketch it in blue here. So we rule up our axes. You're going to label your axes because you got to label them, because once you get practical questions, it might no longer be x and y. It might be distance and time, d and t. It could be something else, h and x. And so you need to make sure that you label it. All right, so we've got x-intercept is -2 over here, and y-intercept was -3. So there, get our ruler, join up our dots. There's my line, and I might just label my coordinates. And I'm done. So finding the gradient of the line of 2 points. So you've got 2 points, it's still a straight line, we're still talking about linear. So do you guys remember the rule for the gradient when you've got 2 points? It's, remember, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So what that rule is referring to is that you've got 2 points. And you just label what the first one, I'm going to label the first one y1 and x1 and y1, and x2 and y2. You can do rise over run, but we can't do that unless we have the graph. We haven't got the graph here, so we're going to use this. So what you do, doesn't matter which point you call point 1 or point 2, as long as they're buddied together. Do you understand? Like that coordinate, if you're calling it x1, it has to be y1 next to it. All right, so off we go. It says determine the gradient. So I'll just write the rule. Always write your rule, because if you accidentally stuff up a calculation, at least you've shown that you know what you're talking about, and you may get some marks, or you might consequential marks because you might use it later on. All right, so y2 for me was -2 minus y1, which is 8, and x2 was 5 minus my x1 was -3. So this is where you've got to be really careful. So -2 minus 8 is -10. Now this one in here, when you have a minus taking away a minus, that becomes a plus, okay? So really we've got 5 plus 3, which becomes 8. You should simplify that. So 2 goes into that, 5 and 4. You would leave your answer like this. A fraction answer is an exact answer and a better answer. Leave it like that. As long as it's simplified like that, that's fine. Now, finding the equation of the line given the y-intercept and a point on the graph. So what they're saying here is we can read off the c value because we know that a straight line follows this formula. Yeah, so you said this is the y-intercept, isn't it? So I can already read off here that that is 1. So I'm going to write +1. So if you have a look at it, I have everything but the gradient. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this point, and I know that's an x and a y. So I'm going to use this point to find out the gradient using this, what I've got so far. Because this is an x and this is a y. So every time I see y, I'm going to put 13 equals m, and every time I see x, I put a 4 plus 1. Okay? So this is one way of doing it, and I'll show you the other way in a minute. So I've got 13 equals 4m plus 1. If I bring this 1 over here, what will that do? Good, so 13 minus 1 equals 4m. So I've got 12 equals 4m. And, 12 divided by 4 equals m. So, alright, so we're going to work out use the m. We're going to go rise over run. Oops. Okay, so we're at 1 and we go up to 13. So what have we gone to rise of? 12. Good, that makes more sense. So 12, and we've gone from, we're on x is 0 and we've gone across to 4. So we've got a run of 4. So what's 12 divided by 4? 3. So you could get the gradient that way, or you could do it the other way. My way you can use even if you don't have the y-intercept, or if you've been given 2 other points, that's how we could have found the y-intercept. Now, they just said find the equation, so we now know, don't forget to answer the final question. So therefore, y equals 3x plus 1. Sorry, we missed, that got rubbed out. Okay, and there's your answer. Okay, so now we have to find the equation where we're only given 2 points. We can't see the y-intercept there, so there's going to be a little bit more work involved. So we know we still got to follow this pattern, y equals mx plus c. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find the m, and I'm going to use my formula of y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So over here, I'm going to label those points, x2 and y2, so that I can substitute them in. So I have y2 being 7, and the rule says minus, and it's 11 over 6 minus 3. So 7 minus 11 is -4. And 6 minus 3 is 3. So I got the gradient to be negative. Is that line going downhill? Yeah, so I reckon I'm good, so that's a way to know, I think I did it right. You've got to look at checking it in a different way. If I check what I just did, I'm going to do the same mistake generally, So you've got to try and find something to check your work in a different way. So that's how I'm trying to show you. So now we can do like what we did before. I know now that the equation is -4 over 3x plus c. Now, because I don't know what c is, but I do have a point. I'm going to use one of the points, and I'm going to use this one. I'm just picking any one. Doesn't matter, you'll get the same answer, so I'm picking that one. So I've got 3, 11. So this is my x and that's my y, and I'll pop it into this equation. So I've got 11 equals -4/3 times 3 plus c. Okay, so here's where your fraction rules, I know you're so good at it, but you just multiply across there, yeah? So this one would be -12/3, okay? Plus c. What does that become? Good. And then if I move this over an equal sign, it will become +4, good. And 15. So have I found out what c is?
Yeah.
Yep, good. So therefore, my equation is y equals -4/3x plus 15.